The flight that changed everything. 17-year-old Ethan Marshall stepped into the bustling terminal of Denver International Airport with his heart pounding against his ribs. The airport was alive with the sound of announcements, the hum of luggage wheels, and the chatter of travelers from all walks of life. Clutching the handle of his guitar case, Ethan inhaled deeply, letting the moment sink in. This was the beginning of the next chapter in his life. A journey to the prestigious National Young Musicians Competition in Los Angeles. Ethan's mother, a piano teacher who had sacrificed much to support his dreams, had saved for months to buy him a business-class ticket. It wasn't just about comfort. It was a symbol of the countless hours Ethan had spent practicing, honing his craft, and pushing himself toward excellence. This trip was more than a competition. It was a declaration of his ambition and his mother's unwavering belief in him. As he approached the boarding gate, Ethan's excitement bubbled over. His neatly packed bag hung over his shoulder, and his guitar case felt light despite its weight. Dressed in a casual yet polished outfit of dark jeans, a collared shirt, and sneakers, Ethan radiated a confidence that belied his years. Boarding pass in hand, he joined the line for priority boarding, his heart racing with anticipation. "Good afternoon, Mr. Marshall," the gate agent said with a friendly smile. "Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," Ethan replied, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. Stepping into the aircraft, Ethan marveled at the sleek interior of the business-class cabin. Soft leather seats, generous legroom, and an air of calm sophistication greeted him. This was a world he had never experienced, but one he felt he had earned. Finding his seat, 2A by the window, Ethan carefully stowed his guitar and settled in. As the plane began to fill, Ethan retrieved a sheet of music from his bag. He immersed himself in the notes, mentally rehearsing his performance. The rhythmic scribble of a pencil against the page was the only sound he made, his focus absolute. But his tranquility was short-lived. "Excuse me, young man," came a clipped voice, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. He looked up to see a tall, impeccably dressed flight attendant standing beside him. Her name tag read Linda Myers, and her expression was anything but welcoming. Her sharp eyes scanned him as if he were an anomaly. "Yes," Ethan responded politely, his confusion evident. "May I see your boarding pass?" Linda's tone was firm, almost accusatory. Ethan blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Of course," he said, retrieving the slip of paper and handing it over. Linda scrutinized the boarding pass, her lips pursed into a thin line. "Business class, huh?" she muttered, more to herself than to Ethan. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his tone unwavering. "My mother purchased it for me." Linda's gaze shifted back to him, her eyes narrowing as if searching for cracks in his story. After what felt like an eternity, she handed the pass back without a word and walked away. Ethan exhaled, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. The exchange had unsettled him, but he resolved to brush it off. He had a long flight ahead and a competition to focus on. Minutes later, Linda returned, her demeanor more curt than before. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your ticket," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Please follow me." Ethan's stomach sank. "An issue? What kind of issue?" "It's best if we discuss it in the galley," she said, her eyes flicking around the cabin. "Please." Passengers nearby glanced at Ethan, their whispers barely audible but heavy with speculation. He felt a lump rise in his throat, but nodded, standing up and grabbing his guitar. Linda led him through the aisle with brisk steps, her heels clicking against the floor. Ethan's heart raced as they reached the galley, away from the prying eyes of other passengers. She turned to face him, arms crossed and an air of authority about her. "This seat doesn't seem appropriate for you," Linda said bluntly. Ethan frowned, his confusion deepening. "I don't understand. My ticket is valid." Linda's gaze hardened. "Business class is reserved for certain passengers. I believe there may have been a mistake with your assignment." Ethan felt heat rise to his face. "With all due respect, my mother booked that seat for me. I have the ticket to prove it." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. I'll have to involve security if you don't comply. The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. Ethan's hands trembled slightly, but he refused to let his frustration show. With a deep breath, he nodded. Fine. I'll move. As Linda led him back through the cabin, the whispers grew louder, each word a dagger to Ethan's pride. He kept his head high, determined not to let the humiliation show. The sharp contrast between the spacious business class and the cramped economy section hit him like a punch. Linda gestured to an empty middle seat, and Ethan squeezed in, his guitar awkwardly positioned at his feet. As he sat there, the weight of the injustice settled on him. He had worked so hard, poured everything into this craft, and yet he was being judged, not by his talent or character, but by his appearance. He stared out the window, the hum of the plane filling the silence around him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from his mother. What happened? Are you okay? Ethan hesitated before typing a reply. They moved me to economy. No explanation. I'm fine. His mother's response was immediate. Don't worry. I'll handle it. Ethan sighed, the knot in his stomach loosening slightly. But as the plane soared into the sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. An unbreakable resolve. Ethan stared out of the small airplane window, the clouds rolling by like waves frozen in time. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but inside, his thoughts roared louder. The cramped economy seat wasn't just physically uncomfortable, it was a glaring reminder of the injustice he had just experienced. He clenched his fists, his mind racing with questions. Why had she singled me out? Was it because I'm young? Or because I don't look the part? Around him, the chatter of passengers was subdued, though a few lingering glances landed his way. Ethan could feel the weight of those stares. They didn't know him, his story, or the sacrifices that had been made to get him here, yet they judged him all the same. The embarrassment was like a stone in his chest, heavy and unyielding. He glanced down at his phone again, rereading his mother's reassuring message. Don't worry. I'll handle it. Her words were always a source of strength for Ethan, but this time, they weren't enough to quell the fire igniting inside him. For years, his mother had been his rock, tirelessly supporting his dream of becoming a professional musician. She'd taken on extra tutoring jobs, sacrificed weekends, and skipped vacations, all so Ethan could have the opportunities she never did. That ticket wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol of their shared journey. Ethan shifted in his seat, pulling his guitar case closer to him. He opened it slightly, revealing the polished wood of the instrument that had been his companion through countless late nights and early mornings. Running a hand over the strings, he felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane. This was about respect, fairness, and standing up for himself. The echoes of injustice. In the business class cabin, Linda Myers tried to shake the unease that had taken root. She walked the aisles with practiced precision, offering drinks and snacks to passengers who barely acknowledged her. Yet, her mind kept drifting back to Ethan. Her initial confidence in her decision began to falter. The boy's calm demeanor, his polite but firm responses, they didn't match the image she had constructed in her mind. What if I was wrong? She thought, a nagging voice in the back of her mind. But Linda was not one to admit mistakes easily. Years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, even when they led to difficult confrontations. However, whispers among the passengers were growing louder. A woman in her 40s, seated in 3C, leaned toward her companion. Did you see what happened with that boy? He didn't look like he was causing any trouble. I know, the man replied, glancing toward the economy section. He seemed so composed. Why would they move him? Linda could feel their eyes on her as she moved past, her professionalism now tinged with discomfort. She focused on her duties, but the questions persisted. Why did she feel so unsettled? Why did this particular interaction refuse to fade into the background like so many others? A quiet supporter. Back in the economy section, Ethan wasn't entirely alone. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man with a kind face observed him with interest. Dressed in a well-worn blazer and wire-rimmed glasses, the man exuded an air of quiet curiosity. He had noticed the commotion earlier, the young man being led from business class to economy with his head held high. It reminded him of something he'd experienced in his own youth, a moment when he, too, had been unfairly judged. The man leaned slightly toward Ethan, careful not to intrude but hoping to offer a small gesture of solidarity. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I couldn't help but notice what happened earlier. Are you okay?" Ethan looked up, surprised by the stranger's warm tone. "I'm fine," he replied, though the words felt hollow. "It's just frustrating." "I can imagine," the man said with a nod. "It takes a lot of strength to handle something like that with the grace you showed. Not everyone could manage it." Ethan offered a faint smile, appreciating the kind words. "Thank you. I just don't understand why it happened." The man hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, people make assumptions based on what they see, not who you are. It's unfair, but it happens. The important thing is how you respond." Ethan nodded slowly, the man's words resonating with him. I don't want to let this slide. It feels wrong." "Then don't," the man said simply. "You have every right to stand up for yourself. And if you ever need help, there are people who will stand with you." The stranger's words were a small but powerful reminder that Ethan wasn't alone. Though the encounter was brief, it planted a seed of resolve in Ethan's mind. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been judged unfairly. If he could do something to prevent it from happening again, he would. The call to action. As the flight continued, Ethan's mind raced with ideas. He thought about his mother, her determination to give him the life she never had. He thought about the countless hours he had spent perfecting his craft, the sacrifices that had been made to get him here. And he thought about Linda Myers, her dismissive tone, and the way she had treated him as though he didn't belong. Ethan reached for his notebook and pen, pulling them from his bag. He began writing furiously, pouring his thoughts onto the page. He wrote about the importance of fairness, the power of perseverance, and the need to challenge biases when they arose. The words flowed easily, fueled by a mix of frustration and determination. When he finished, Ethan read over his notes. They weren't just a reflection of his experience. They were a call to action. He resolved to share his story, not to seek pity, but to inspire change. This wasn't just about one flight. It was about challenging a mindset that too often went unchecked. A sudden shift. Toward the end of the flight, the lead flight attendant, Mark Turner, approached Ethan in his seat. Mark had been observing the situation closely, his keen eyes catching the tension between Linda and Ethan. He crouched slightly to meet Ethan's gaze, his tone calm and measured. "Mr. Marshall," Mark began, "I want to apologize for what happened earlier. It seems there may have been a misunderstanding." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden acknowledgement. "A misunderstanding?" Mark nodded, his expression serious. "I've spoken to Ms. Myers, and I'll be reviewing the situation further after we land. For now, I'd like to offer you a seat back in business class for the remainder of the flight." Ethan hesitated, his emotions conflicted. The offer felt like a step toward justice, but it didn't erase what had happened. He looked Mark in the eye, his voice steady. "Thank you, but I'll stay here. I think it's important that this issue is addressed properly, not just swept under the rug." Mark's respect for Ethan grew in that moment. "Understood. I assure you, this won't be ignored." As Mark walked away, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Change wouldn't come easily, but it was possible. And with that thought, he turned back to his notebook, ready to continue writing the story that would spark something bigger than himself. A mother's determination. Rachel Marshall paced the kitchen floor, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She had just finished speaking with Ethan, and while his voice had been calm, she could hear the strain behind his words. He wasn't the type to complain, but Rachel knew her son well enough to sense the weight of what had happened. Her heart ached at the thought of him being humiliated, judged unfairly by someone who didn't know the first thing about him. She placed the phone down and stared out the window. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the neighborhood, but Rachel's mind was far from serene. Memories of Ethan's journey flooded her thoughts, the years of practice, the sacrifices, the countless hours she had spent working extra shifts to afford his lessons and competitions. The business class ticket had been a way of honoring all of that effort, a small token of her belief in his potential. To hear that he had been dismissed and relegated to economy without cause felt like an insult to both of them. Rachel took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to let this slide. Ethan deserved better, and she would make sure the airline knew it. Opening her laptop, she began searching for the airline's customer service contact information. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as she composed a detailed email. The email. The words came easily, each sentence fueled by a mix of frustration and fierce protectiveness. She described Ethan's background, his achievements, and the significance of this trip. She detailed the events as he had recounted them, highlighting the unwarranted scrutiny he faced and the humiliation of being moved to economy without any valid explanation. Rachel's tone was measured but firm. As a paying customer, my son deserved the respect and dignity afforded to any other passenger in business class. The actions of your flight attendant not only disrupted his travel experience, but also perpetuated a harmful bias that has no place in today's world. I demand a thorough investigation into this matter and a formal apology to my son. Furthermore, I expect to know what steps will be taken to ensure this does not happen to another passenger in the future. After proofreading the email twice, Rachel hit send. The satisfaction was immediate, but it was tempered by a lingering frustration. She wasn't naive. She knew how large corporations often handled complaints, but she wasn't going to stop there. If necessary, she would take her concerns public. Social media, news outlets, whatever it took to make sure her son's voice was heard. The power of connections. As the email was dispatched, Rachel's phone buzzed with a call from her sister, Monica. Monica, a lawyer with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, had always been the family's go-to for advice in tough situations. Rachel answered quickly, relieved to hear her sister's no-nonsense tone. "Rachel, I just saw your message about Ethan," Monica began. "What happened on that flight is completely unacceptable. Have you spoken to the airline yet?" "I sent an email just now," Rachel replied, "but I have a feeling they'll try to brush it off." "They won't if we make enough noise," Monica said, her voice brimming with confidence. "Here's what we're going to do. I'll draft a formal letter to their legal team. It'll outline not just the incident, but the potential legal implications of discriminatory practices. Trust me, they'll pay attention." Rachel felt a surge of gratitude. Monica's unwavering support was exactly what she needed. "Thank you," she said, her voice softening. "I just want Ethan to feel like his hard work matters. He's such a good kid, Monica. He didn't deserve this." "No, he didn't," Monica agreed. "And we're going to make sure they know it." Meanwhile, in the corporate office, the email Rachel had sent didn't go unnoticed. Within hours, it landed in the inbox of the airline's customer relations department. A junior representative read through it, her eyes widening as she absorbed the details. This wasn't the typical complaint about delayed luggage or poor service. This was a serious accusation of bias and mistreatment. The representative forwarded the email to her manager, who escalated it further up the chain. By the end of the day, the incident had reached the desk of Amanda Collins, the airline's vice president of customer experience. Amanda was known for her no-tolerance policy when it came to customer complaints involving discrimination. She immediately called a meeting with her team. "This is a serious issue," Amanda said, her voice sharp. "We need to investigate this thoroughly. I want statements from every crew member on that flight, a review of the passenger's ticket, and a timeline of events. And I want it yesterday." Her team nodded, scribbling notes as Amanda continued. "We'll also need to reach out to the passenger directly. A written apology won't cut it. We need to show that we're taking this seriously. Ethan's resolve. As the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Ethan gathered his belongings, his notebook tucked securely in his bag. The flight might have been turbulent in more ways than one, but he was determined to keep his focus on the competition ahead. He had worked too hard to let this derail him. Yet, as he stepped off the plane and into the terminal, he couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. You've earned your place." Those words had carried him through tough auditions, long practice sessions, and moments of doubt. Now they fueled his resolve to turn this experience into something meaningful. Ethan found a quiet corner in the terminal and pulled out his phone. He opened his notes app and began writing again. This time, it wasn't just about the flight. He wrote about his journey, his dreams, and the obstacles he had faced. He wrote about the importance of perseverance and the power of standing up for what's right. As he typed, a thought struck him. What if his story could help others? What if sharing his experience could spark a larger conversation about bias and fairness? The idea took root, and Ethan made a decision. Once the competition was over, he would share his story, not out of anger, but out of hope for change. A mother's rallying cry. Back at home, Rachel received an email reply from the airline acknowledging her complaint. It was a standard response, promising an investigation but offering little in the way of immediate action. Rachel wasn't surprised. She forwarded the email to Monica, who responded within minutes with a draft of the formal letter she had promised. "This will get their attention," Monica wrote. Rachel read through the letter, her admiration for her sister growing with every word. The letter was firm, articulate, and unflinching. It demanded accountability and outlined the broader implications of the flight attendant's actions. Rachel hit send without hesitation. As she closed her laptop, Rachel felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about Ethan, it was about setting a precedent. No one should have to experience what he had, especially not for daring to step into a space they had worked so hard to earn. Rachel made a silent vow. She would fight for her son, no matter how long it took. A voice in the storm. Ethan stepped out of Los Angeles International Airport, the warm California air wrapping around him like a welcome embrace. The terminal buzzed with energy, but he felt a quiet resolve within himself. Clutching his guitar case, he hailed a cab to the modest hotel his mother had booked for him. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts about the competition, the events on the flight, and the next steps he needed to take to ensure what had happened to him wouldn't happen to anyone else. As the car weaved through the traffic, Ethan opened his notebook, the pages already filled with scribbles from the flight. He added more notes, sketching out the framework for what he was beginning to see as more than just a personal story. It was a rallying cry for fairness, dignity, and respect. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Staying silent wasn't an option. An unlikely ally. At the hotel, Ethan checked in and found his room. After placing his guitar carefully on the bed, he noticed a message notification on his phone. It was from an unfamiliar number. Curious, he opened it. "Hi Ethan, my name is Greg Simmons. I was on your flight earlier today, seated in economy. I saw what happened to you, and I want to say I'm sorry for how you were treated. I used to work in public relations for a major airline, and I'd like to help you if I can. Let me know if you'd like to talk." Ethan stared at the message, a mix of surprise and skepticism running through him. Who was this Greg Simmons, and why was he reaching out? Yet, something about the tone of the message felt genuine. Ethan decided to reply. "Hi Greg. Thanks for reaching out. I appreciate your support. I'd be interested in hearing what advice you have." Minutes later, Greg responded, arranging a meeting at a coffee shop near the hotel. Ethan hesitated briefly, but ultimately agreed. Something told him this encounter could be important. The meeting. The coffee shop was small but cozy, with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Ethan arrived first, choosing a table near the back. He didn't have to wait long before a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile approached him. "You must be Ethan," Greg said, extending a hand. "That's me," Ethan replied, shaking his hand. They sat down, and Greg wasted no time getting to the point. "First of all, I want to say you handled yourself incredibly well on that flight. I've seen a lot of situations like that, and most people would have either lashed out or crumbled under the pressure. You kept your composure. Thank you," Ethan said, though the compliment felt bittersweet. "It wasn't easy." Greg nodded. "I can imagine. What happened to you wasn't right, and unfortunately, it's not uncommon. I used to work in PR for an airline, and I saw cases like this far too often, passengers being judged based on their age, appearance, or even their ethnicity. It's unacceptable, but it's also deeply ingrained in some people's biases." Ethan leaned forward, intrigued. "So, what can I do about it?" Greg smiled, sensing Ethan's determination. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. You have a powerful story, and stories like yours can create real change. The key is to share it in a way that resonates with people." "How?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. "There are a few ways," Greg said, ticking them off on his fingers. "First, you can write an open letter to the airline, sharing your experience publicly. Social media is a powerful tool for raising awareness. Second, you can reach out to advocacy groups that fight against discrimination in travel. They might be able to amplify your voice. And finally, consider reaching out to local or national media. If your story gains traction, the airline will have no choice but to respond meaningfully." Ethan took a deep breath, the weight of Greg's suggestion sinking in. "That sounds big. Bigger than I was expecting." "It is," Greg said, his tone gentle but firm. "But so is the issue. You have an opportunity to shine a light on something that affects a lot of people. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. Thank you for offering to help." Greg smiled again. "You're welcome. And if you decide to move forward, I'll be here to guide you." The competition. The next day, Ethan arrived at the competition venue, a grand concert hall that seemed to echo with the promise of greatness. The sight of it sent a shiver down his spine, a mix of excitement and nerves. This was his moment, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. Ethan carried his guitar backstage, the instrument feeling like an extension of himself. As he warmed up, the events of the previous day began to fade into the background. Music had always been his refuge, his way of expressing what words couldn't. Now, more than ever, he needed that refuge. When it was his turn to perform, Ethan stepped onto the stage, the lights casting a warm glow over the audience. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and began to play. The music flowed from him effortlessly, each note carrying a piece of his soul. It wasn't just a performance. It was a declaration of who he was and what he stood for. When the final note lingered in the air, the audience erupted into applause. Ethan opened his eyes, a sense of pride swelling within him. No matter what had happened on that flight, he had proven his worth here. He belonged. The turning point. Back at the hotel that evening, Ethan received an email from the airline. It was a generic apology, filled with empty platitudes about customer satisfaction and regret for the inconvenience. Ethan read it twice, his frustration mounting with each word. This wasn't enough. Not for him, and not for anyone else who had ever been treated unfairly. He opened his notebook and began drafting his open letter. He poured his heart into it, describing not just the incident, but the broader implications of such actions. He wrote about the importance of treating every passenger with dignity, regardless of their age, appearance, or background. And he wrote about his hope for a future where such biases no longer existed. When he finished, he sent the draft to Greg, who replied almost immediately with a few suggestions. By the next morning, the letter was ready to go. The spark. Ethan posted the letter on social media, attaching it to a photo of himself with his guitar. Within hours, the post began to gain traction. Comments poured in, some from strangers offering support, others sharing their own stories of discrimination. The post was shared hundreds, then thousands of times. By the end of the day, a local news outlet had reached out, asking to interview Ethan about his experience. As he read their message, a sense of purpose washed over him. This was bigger than he had imagined, but he was ready for it. He wasn't just standing up for himself anymore. He was standing up for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. The movement grows. The next morning, Ethan woke to find his phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. His social media post had gone viral overnight, garnering thousands of likes, comments, and shares. Messages of support poured in from strangers across the globe, musicians, students, travelers, and parents who resonated with his story. Many shared their own experiences of bias and unfair treatment, their words amplifying the weight of the problem. Among the messages were inquiries from local news stations, journalists, and even a few high-profile figures in the music world. Ethan scrolled through them with a mix of astonishment and resolve. What had started as a personal struggle was now becoming a public conversation, a call to action. One particular message caught Ethan's eye. It was from Travelers for Equality, an advocacy group dedicated to combating discrimination in the travel industry. Their email was direct and encouraging. Ethan, your story has inspired countless people, including us. We'd love to collaborate with you to raise awareness about these issues and advocate for systemic change. Let us know how we can support your efforts. Ethan read the email twice, his heart pounding. This was exactly what Greg Simmons had suggested, a way to transform his experience into something bigger than himself. Without hesitation, he replied, agreeing to a meeting with their team. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat in a virtual meeting with two representatives from the organization. Emma, the group's director, spoke first. Her voice was steady, her passion evident. Ethan, your story has struck a chord with so many people. We've been working on initiatives to address biases in the travel industry, but your experience puts a human face to the issue. If you're willing, we'd like you to become an ambassador for our campaign. Ethan hesitated for a moment. The idea of being a public figure for such an important cause was daunting, but the thought of making a real difference outweighed his fears. I'd be honored, he said, his voice steady. What would that involve? Emma smiled. We'll help you craft a message that reaches the right people, travelers, airlines, policymakers. You'd be sharing your story through interviews, public appearances, and social media. Together, we can push for meaningful change. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Let's do it. Facing the airline. Meanwhile, the airline had begun to feel the heat from Ethan's viral post. The public backlash was swift and unforgiving, with hashtags like #FairFlights and #RespectEveryPassenger trending on social media. Customers threatened to boycott the airline, demanding accountability for what had happened to Ethan. Amanda Collins, the airline's vice president of customer experience, convened an emergency meeting with her team. We're in damage control mode, she said, her tone clipped. This has escalated beyond a simple apology. We need to take decisive action. The team debated their options, finally agreeing to invite Ethan for a private meeting with the airline's leadership. They hoped to resolve the issue and salvage their reputation. Ethan received the invitation the following day. Though skeptical, he agreed to meet, knowing it was an opportunity to demand not just an apology, but concrete steps toward change. He reached out to Greg and Emma for advice, and both encouraged him to use the meeting to push for systemic reforms. The meeting took place in a sleek conference room at the airline's headquarters. Ethan arrived with Greg by his side, his guitar slung over his shoulder as a subtle reminder of why he had been on that flight in the first place. Amanda Collins greeted them, her demeanor professional but tense. Ethan, thank you for coming. I want to start by apologizing for what happened to you. It was unacceptable, and we take full responsibility. Ethan nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "I appreciate the apology, but words alone won't fix this. What happened to me isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger problem in the travel industry, and it needs to change." Amanda looked taken aback by his directness, but quickly composed herself. "You're absolutely right. That's why we're here, to listen and to take actionable steps." Ethan glanced at Greg, who gave him a reassuring nod. Turning back to Amanda, Ethan outlined his demands: mandatory bias training for all employees, a transparent system for handling customer complaints, and a public commitment to treating all passengers with dignity and respect, regardless of their age, appearance, or background. Amanda listened carefully, taking notes. "These are reasonable and necessary steps," she said. "I'll make sure they're implemented. Additionally, we'd like to invite you to help us shape these initiatives. Your perspective would be invaluable." Ethan agreed, feeling a flicker of hope. This was more than he had expected. A chance to influence real change from within. The public address. Following the meeting, the airline issued a public statement, acknowledging their shortcomings and outlining their plans for reform. They highlighted Ethan's role in bringing the issue to light, committing to transparency and improvement. Ethan also took to social media, sharing his thoughts on the meeting. "This isn't just about one incident," he wrote. "It's about making sure every passenger is treated with respect, no matter who they are. I'm encouraged by the airline's willingness to listen, but this is just the beginning. Let's keep the conversation going." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Comments flooded in, praising Ethan for his courage and leadership. The story was picked up by major news outlets, further amplifying the movement. A new purpose. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan found himself busier than ever. Between interviews, meetings with advocacy groups, and preparations for the next round of the music competition, his life had taken on a new sense of purpose. Music was still his passion, but now he saw how his voice could resonate beyond the stage. One evening, as he practiced a new composition in his hotel room, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from a young musician who had seen his story. "Hi, Ethan. I just wanted to say thank you. I've faced similar challenges, and your story has inspired me to keep pushing forward. You're making a difference." Ethan smiled, his resolve solidifying. The journey hadn't been easy, but it was worth it. He wasn't just a passenger on a plane anymore. He was a voice for change, and he intended to keep speaking up for as long as it took. A legacy of change. Ethan stood backstage at the National Young Musicians Competition, his guitar resting against his leg. The hum of the audience filtered through the heavy curtains, a reminder of the moment he had worked toward for years. Yet, as much as the competition mattered, it no longer felt like the pinnacle of his journey. The events of the past few weeks had transformed him, adding a deeper purpose to his music and his life. When the announcer called his name, Ethan took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. The applause was immediate, but Ethan wasn't focused on the audience's reaction. Instead, his mind was on the countless people who had reached out to him after his story went viral. He thought about the aspiring musician who had thanked him for his courage, the travelers who had shared their own stories of unfair treatment, and his mother, who had fought tirelessly to ensure he was given the respect he deserved. As he began to play, the melody seemed to carry the weight of all those voices. It wasn't just a performance. It was a tribute to everyone who had supported him, believed in him, and been inspired by him. Each note was infused with emotion, his fingers moving with a confidence that came from knowing his music had the power to connect and heal. When the final chord rang out, the audience erupted into a standing ovation. Ethan smiled, bowing briefly before exiting the stage. Backstage, he was greeted by his fellow competitors, who congratulated him with genuine admiration. The award and a platform. Later that evening, as the winners were announced, Ethan's name was called as the first-place recipient. He walked to the stage, his heart pounding, and accepted the award with a sense of gratitude that went beyond the trophy in his hands. "Thank you," he said into the microphone, his voice steady. This competition has been an incredible experience, and I'm honored to be here. But I'd like to take a moment to talk about something beyond music. The room fell silent, the audience hanging on his every word. Recently, I faced a situation that reminded me how important it is to stand up for what's right. It wasn't easy, but it taught me that our voices matter. Whether we're musicians, travelers, or anyone else, we all deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. I want to dedicate this award to everyone who has ever felt like they didn't belong and to everyone working to create a world where that's no longer the case. The applause was thunderous, and Ethan left the stage feeling a sense of fulfillment that no trophy could provide. The airline's reforms. True to their word, the airline followed through on the promises made during Ethan's meeting with Amanda Collins. Mandatory bias training was rolled out for all employees, with a specific focus on frontline staff like flight attendants. The airline also launched a customer feedback platform designed to handle complaints transparently and efficiently. Ethan was invited to participate in a company-wide town hall meeting, where he shared his story with hundreds of employees. His words left a lasting impact, sparking discussions about the importance of empathy and fairness in the workplace. For many, his presence served as a reminder that their actions could shape someone's entire experience. In a symbolic gesture, the airline renamed their bias training program Ethan's Resolve, a nod to the young man who had turned an injustice into a movement for change. The program was soon adopted by other airlines, setting a new industry standard, a rising star. As Ethan's story continued to gain traction, he found himself balancing two roles, that of a rising musician and a social advocate. His music career took off, with invitations to perform at prestigious venues and collaborations with renowned artists. But no matter how busy his schedule became, Ethan remained committed to his advocacy work. He partnered with Travelers for Equality to create a campaign called Everyone Belongs, which aimed to raise awareness about biases in the travel industry and beyond. The campaign included a series of videos featuring Ethan sharing his story, along with resources for passengers who had experienced discrimination. The campaign gained widespread attention, earning support from celebrities, activists, and everyday travelers. Ethan's story became a symbol of resilience and the power of standing up for what's right, inspiring others to share their own experiences and demand change. A mother's pride. Back in Denver, Rachel Marshall watched her son's journey unfold with a mixture of pride and awe. She had always believed in Ethan's talent and character, but seeing him take on such a significant role in the world was beyond anything she had imagined. One evening, as she watched a televised interview with Ethan, Rachel felt a wave of emotion wash over her. In the interview, Ethan spoke about the sacrifices his mother had made for him and how her unwavering support had shaped him into the person he was. "She's the reason I'm here," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Everything I do to honor her belief in me." Rachel wiped away a tear, her heart swelling with pride. She had always told Ethan to follow his dreams, but now she realized that he was also creating a legacy that would impact countless others, a legacy of change. Years later, Ethan's name became synonymous with resilience, fairness, and the power of music to unite. His advocacy work continued to grow, influencing policies not just in the travel industry, but in other sectors where biases persisted. His music, infused with the lessons he had learned, resonated with audiences around the world. Ethan never forgot the moment on that flight that had sparked it all. It had been painful and humiliating, but it had also been transformative. He had turned that experience into a catalyst for change, proving that even the smallest voices could make a difference when amplified by courage and determination. As he stood on stage at yet another sold-out concert, Ethan looked out at the sea of faces and smiled. He strummed the first chord on his guitar, the music carrying a message that had become his life's work. Everyone belongs. Everyone matters. And together, we can create a world where that truth is undeniable. A lifetime commitment. Ethan's journey was far from over. While his music career soared, he continued to dedicate time to the causes he cared deeply about. The Everyone Belongs campaign evolved into a nonprofit organization, with Ethan serving as its founder and president. The organization worked tirelessly to address systemic biases across industries, offering educational programs, advocacy tools, and legal support to individuals who faced discrimination. One of Ethan's proudest moments came during a United Nations panel on human rights and equality, where he was invited to speak about his experience and the broader implications of bias in society. Standing before an audience of world leaders and changemakers, Ethan shared his story once again, emphasizing the importance of empathy and inclusion. Bias isn't just a personal issue, he said, his voice steady and resonant. It's a societal one. But every small step we take, every story we share, every policy we change, brings us closer to a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve. That's the legacy I want to leave behind. The panel concluded with a standing ovation, and Ethan knew that his message was reaching not just individuals but entire nations. An unexpected reunion. Years later, during a layover in Denver, Ethan was approached by a familiar face, Linda Myers, the flight attendant who had removed him from business class all those years ago. She looked older, her once sharp eyes now softer, her demeanor more subdued. "Ethan," she said, her voice hesitant, "I don't know if you remember me, but—" "I remember," Ethan said, his tone neutral but not unkind. Linda nodded, her expression a mix of regret and gratitude. "I've followed your story, and I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. That day, I judged you unfairly, and I've carried the weight of that ever since. I'm glad you turned it into something so meaningful." Ethan studied her for a moment, then extended his hand. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." Linda shook his hand, a small but genuine smile on her face. "You've inspired so many people, including me. After that flight, I participated in the bias training your program introduced. It changed the way I see people, the way I do my job. I just thought you should know." Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "That's what this is all about: change, growth, and understanding." As Linda walked away, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. His work had come full circle, touching even the person whose actions had set it all in motion. The future. Ethan's influence only grew over the years. He became a sought-after speaker, his talks blending music with powerful messages about equality and justice. His songs, many inspired by his advocacy work, became anthems for social movements around the world. Despite his success, Ethan remained grounded, always remembering the people who had supported him along the way: his mother, his mentor Greg, the countless strangers who had shared their own stories, and even the skeptics who had challenged him to do better. One evening, as he sat in his home studio working on a new composition, Ethan received a message from a young musician. It read, "Ethan, I'm about to give up on my dream. People keep telling me I don't belong in the spaces I want to be in. But then I came across your story, and it gave me hope. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to stand tall, even when the world tries to bring you down." Ethan replied immediately, "Never give up. Your dreams are valid, and your voice matters. Keep going. You're stronger than you know." He put down his phone and picked up his guitar, playing a melody that captured the spirit of resilience and hope. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. Ethan had found his place in the world, not just as a musician, but as a force for change. And he was just getting started.